Why would a doctor take a sharpened iron tool and bore a hole straight into someone's skull without anesthesia? Why did patients, writhing in agony, thank them afterward? In medieval Europe, trepanation was not just a surgery, it was a ritual, a doorway, a belief that pain could purge evil, that madness had a location, and that salvation could be found by opening the head. But what if they were not releasing demons? What if they were letting something in? This is the dark, disturbing truth behind why medieval doctors drilled holes in people's skulls and why they believed it helped. It begins with a scream, not one of terror, but of relief. In a stone chamber damp with candle smoke and iron stench, a woman named Isabeau lay chained to her bed, her lips cracked with fever, her eyes rolling upward as though pursued by something no one else could see. Outside, the town of Rouen whispered about her. Possessed, they said. Witch-born, muttered others. She had not slept in 5 days. She had not spoken in words for 10. And in the flickering firelight, they said her face changed shape. It was the year 1293, and the body was still a battlefield between the church, the stars, and the knife. And that night, it was the knife that won. A young physician named Giraud de Pontoise, barely 30 and already infamous for his methods, prepared a trepan, an iron drill with a toothed wheel. He did not believe in demons, not fully, but he did believe in pressure, in imbalance, in things locked too long behind bone. When he turned to the gathered priests and family, his voice did not tremble. She must bleed from the head. The devil cannot live where the soul escapes. They held her down. She thrashed until her bones ached and her mouth foamed red. And then, as the instrument bored into her skull with an agonizing crunch, a sound like snapping branches, her body fell suddenly still. And for the first time in weeks, Isabeau smiled. Trepanation, they called it. A holy operation, an opening of the skull to let the dark out. But not everyone believed it was divine, not everyone survived, and not everyone who performed it did so in the name of healing. Giraud rose to fame after that night. Nobles summoned him across France to open the heads of their afflicted sons and wives, their trembling bishops, their daughters who woke screaming from sleep. He kept every bone plug removed from the skulls, labeled, cleaned, and shelved in a locked wooden chest. But Giraud was not interested in healing alone. His notes, discovered centuries later, hinted at something far stranger, a theory that pain and memory lived in the bone itself, that sorrow was physical, that madness had weight, and that by boring into it, one might touch the soul of a person like tapping a vein. He was called to Caen next, where the Lord's child had ceased speaking after seeing his mother drown. Locked in silence, they said. Giraud trepanned behind the right temple, whispering as he worked. The boy opened his mouth mid-procedure, blood pouring from his ears, and named the man who had pushed his mother into the river. After that, word spread. It was no longer about demons. It was about truth, memory, secrets buried so deep, only the bone remembered. But others watched Giraud from the shadows. One was a monk named Father Thévenin, who had known Giraud in the university at Montpellier, who had once loved the same woman, who had seen his name buried beneath Giraud's in scholarly texts, despite his earlier findings on cranial imbalance. And he had a theory of his own, that Giraud was not releasing darkness, but putting it in. By winter of 1296, 7 patients had vanished after being cured. Families claimed their loved ones were not the same, that their laughter was wrong, that they stared too long at nothing, that they heard voices coming from behind the walls. And then one morning, in a frost-bitten convent outside Poitiers, a nun was found dead. Her head had been opened like a cracked egg. No tools nearby, no blood trail, no prints in the snow. Only a name carved into the stone floor beneath her: Giraud. When the bishop's guards arrived at Giraud's manor, they found the chest of bone plugs open, empty, the fireplace still warm, and on the wall, smeared in something thick and red, the words, "It is not the hole that whispers, it is what comes through it." They buried the nun without her head. The Bishop of Poitiers forbade public mourning. He feared panic, or worse, reverence. Rumors had already begun to spread that her soul had been taken through the wound, that her body was a vessel emptied by the devil's surgeon. The grave was marked only by a stone etched with salt water and ash, washed clean within days. But one man refused to look away. Father Thévenin stood at the edge of her grave as the final shovelful of dirt fell. His fists were clenched, his nails sunk into his palms. He had once written treatises on the balance of the four humours, but none of that mattered now. What he had seen on the convent wall was not medicine, it was prophecy. And he knew Giraud had not run. Men like Giraud did not run. They prepared. Thévenin returned to Montpellier under false name and nightfall. There, hidden in the dust-choked halls of the old university, he found Giraud's student records, altered, erased, rewritten in different hands. But one detail survived: a correspondence with a noble family in the Vosges mountains, encrypted letters sealed with a black wax sigil, a skull with an open third eye. It was a symbol Thévenin had seen once before. Years ago, a student had arrived from Prague with wild theories about bone memory, claiming that the skull was not just the house of thought, but a gate, a receiver for celestial truths. He vanished after one term, leaving behind a single diagram, a map of the human skull overlaid with alchemical symbols and a spiral etched in blood. That same spiral now appeared in the corner of one of Giraud's surviving patient charts. Thévenin followed the trail north. The Vosges winter was cruel. Snow weighed down the pine trees like bowed penitents. In the village of Brionne, a woman named Melisande kept an inn where no travelers came. Her left eye was white from a fever, but her memory was clear. Yes, she remembered Giraud. He had come 5 years prior with a cart full of glass jars and 3 silent assistants. They had taken up residence in the manor of Lord des Étoiles, a noble whose entire family had died of a sleep that would not end. "Did he cure anyone?" Thévenin asked. She shook her head slowly. "He made them quiet." The manor was abandoned. Ivy had ripped apart the wooden balconies, and rats moved in shadows that seemed to flinch at the light. But in the basement, Thévenin found the remnants of something surgical: hooks, harnesses, and in the far corner, a wall of skulls. Not just bones, altered. Each skull bore a borehole, neatly drilled, polished at the edges. Some had iron rings affixed around the hole, as though something had once been inserted and removed. Others bore symbols carved deep into the bone, not Latin, not Greek. He found one skull with a name scrawled inside in ink that had faded to brown: Isabeau. But just as Thévenin reached for it, a sound behind him, breathing. He turned. No one. And then, a whisper, so faint it could have been wind, but it came from the skull itself. He fled. That night, as the storm raged, he locked himself in the inn and studied what he had stolen. A single chart torn from Giraud's notes. On it, a drawing of a child's skull, freshly trepanned, with 3 lines of writing: "The voice comes clearer in children. Dreams leak through unformed bone. Do not leave them alone after the hole is opened." He did not sleep. When he returned to his room after dawn, Melisande was gone. No sign of struggle. But on her bed lay something wrapped in linen. It pulsed faintly beneath the fabric, wet with something that smelled of metal and fire. It was a skull, still warm, and it was not hers. The skull throbbed beneath the linen like something alive. Thévenin dared not touch it. He wrapped it tighter, burying it beneath firewood in the hearth. But even as flames curled around the edges, it refused to burn. A sour steam hissed into the air, filling the room with the stench of marrow and rot, and then came the voice, thin, distant, as if spoken from beneath deep water. "He is not done." He fled Brion before the sun reached its peak, carrying only his journal and a single name repeated in Giraud's last known letter, Aurélien of Lorraine. The text called him the first to survive with memory intact, and the only one who hears without madness. Thévenin found Aurélien in the north, hidden in the ruins of a former monastery turned prison, tucked among jagged hills like a wound the earth refused to heal. Aurélien was no longer a man. He was a relic. Iron circled his head, fused into the bone by rust and years of skin grown over steel. He sat chained to the wall by both ankles, but not to keep him in place, to keep him still. Every time his head moved, he moaned, and the moan turned to weeping. Thévenin tried to speak, but Aurélien shook, his teeth clattering. His voice, when it came, was like dead leaves crumbling underfoot. "They listen when I dream," he said. "Not voices, not people, structures." "What did Giraud do to you?" Aurélien's lips trembled. "He said I had a gift, that the whole let me receive. I thought he meant visions, but it was not the heavens he opened. He pointed me to the sky, but the hole turned downward." Thévenin felt ice bloom in his spine. "What is below?" Aurélien looked up, blood leaking from his right ear. "Something that does not sleep, something that never forgot us." Before Thévenin could ask more, Aurélien screamed, not in pain, but like a man catching fire from within. His pupils rolled back, and from deep within his throat came a whisper, clearly not his own. "The gate is bone, the key is blood, and the door has begun to open." Aurélien collapsed, twitching. Thévenin saw then the faint shimmer of heat radiating from the iron band around his skull. But there was more. Hidden beneath Aurélien's cot, wrapped in parchment stained black from mold, lay the lost final journal of Giraud de Pontoise. It did not begin with medical theories. It began with a confession. "I drilled not to cure, but to reach." The ancients spoke of skulls as vessels, as holy chalices into which dreams poured. But the dreams are not ours. I thought I could control it. I thought the bone could contain what lies beyond pain. I was wrong. It sees through them now, and it will come wearing our faces. The last page bore a single illustration, a crown made not of gold but human teeth, each inscribed with a name. Many were smudged, but one name was still visible, clear as bone. Thévenin. Hands trembling, he dropped the parchment. His mind reeled. He had never been a patient, had never undergone trepanation. Or had he? Was there a gap in his memories? Had Giraud? The door creaked open. He turned, heart hammering, but no one entered. Only cold wind from the hall. And on the ground, something rolled gently to a stop at his feet. A single molar, smooth, bloodless, etched with one word, soon. The molar stared up at him like an eye ripped from the socket of God. Thévenin stumbled back, the tooth clinking softly against stone as it spun, then fell still. His breath came shallow, fogging the cold air. His name, his very identity, etched into bone. A message sent through time, or worse, from something outside of it. He left the monastery before the iron around Aurelien's head cooled. Night clung to the valleys like wet wool, and his thoughts became a cage of questions. How had Giraud known his name before they ever met? Had his studies at Montpellier been a coincidence or a design? And what if the missing time in his memories was not an accident, but surgery? He reached Strasbourg after 3 days, fevered and shivering. He had sent word ahead to one person he thought might still help him, Lady Eleanor of Thuringia, a physician, a scholar of the old texts, and his former lover, before Giraud seduced them both with promises of fame. She met him at the door of her villa with a candle and a pistol. "You are followed," she said. "I saw them watching from the orchard this morning. They do not blink." Inside, her study was a cathedral of knowledge, walls lined with skulls, not for decoration, but classification. Sumerian trepans, Celtic boreholes, Polynesian craniotomies. She poured Thévenin a cup of bitter tea and spread Giraud's stolen notes across the desk. "You are not wrong," she whispered, reading, "but you are not first." She opened a drawer and retrieved a box wrapped in velvet. Inside, a small circlet of bone. It was not carved. It had grown that way, naturally fused at birth into a perfect ring. Within it, 3 tiny holes, each drilled not by tool, but by time itself. "This belonged to a child found in Sardinia," she said, "buried upright, mouth sewn shut with gold wire. The villagers called her La Chiave, the key." Thévenin's pulse thundered. Why would someone be born with the crown? Eleanor stared into the fire. Because some doors want to open themselves. She went on to explain what Giraud had hinted at, that certain skulls resonated with frequencies beyond human hearing. That trepanation did not create the gateway, it simply tuned it. Like turning a dial until you catch a broadcast from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. "He believed that beneath thought, beneath pain, there is signal," she said, "and it does not come from us." But before Thévenin could reply, the room trembled, not like an earthquake, but a pulse, like the echo of a massive bell no one could hear. The candles flickered, and from outside the villa, they heard a sound that would never leave them. Knocking. Not on the door, on the walls, the roof, the floor, as if something immense circled the house, tapping to be let in. Eleanor seized his arm. "They found you." She dragged him into the cellar. There, beneath the floorboards, lay an ossuary, bones stacked like archives. At the very back, hidden in a locked iron case, she kept one final artifact. A partial skeleton recovered from beneath the catacombs of Paris. Skull trepanned on all sides, dozens of holes, but not random. A pattern, a map, and carved across the forehead, Dom vs Os Sivm, the House of Bones. It was not just a metaphor. They began to connect it, city by city, case by case. Patients who claimed to hear voices long before surgery, artists who painted spirals without knowing why, entire families whose skulls bore evidence of trepanation, generation after generation. They were being bred, selected, and Giraud was only one of many. Thévenin turned to Eleanor, words shaking in his throat. "We are not researching this. We are part of it." But before she could answer, the wall behind them cracked. A bone-white hand punched through the stone, long and thin and inhumanly smooth. A hand with no fingernails, but a ring of teeth embedded in the wrist. And from above, a voice, not screamed, not spoken, but placed inside their heads like a blade in soft fruit. You opened the gate. We are what came through. The wall split with a sound like splitting marrow. Eleanor screamed, not out of fear but fury, and fired the pistol point blank into the hand. It jerked back, but did not bleed. It retreated, melting through the wall like mist fleeing sunlight. Above them, the villa groaned. Thévenin grabbed the ossuary's iron lockbox, the skull marked DOMVSOSSEVM still inside, and they fled through the servant tunnel, stumbling into the forest beyond. Behind them, the house of knowledge collapsed. Not in fire or explosion, it folded as if time itself had rejected it. They did not speak again until they reached the river. The moon hung overhead, swollen and wet, like an eye too exhausted to blink. Eleanor was shaking. "I should have burned it all," she whispered. "Every skull, every chart, even the child's ring." But Thévenin knew it was too late for flames. The infection was not in the documents, it was in the knowing. He opened the iron box again. Something had changed. The trepanned skull, Giraud's last preserved patient, now vibrated faintly in his hands. Hairline fractures had appeared along its crown, as if it were trying to open itself. And inside the largest hole, pressed into the bone, was a rolled scrap of parchment. He removed it gently. The ink was fresh. The last key is already in place. He never needed all of them. He only needed you to believe. Belief completes the circuit. Below the writing, the final name was signed not in pen, but in what looked like burnt blood. Giraud. Thévenin reeled. He is alive. Eleanor swallowed. Or worse, he is not only alive. They followed the trail south toward the Pyrenees. It was Eleanor who remembered the last clue, a monastery beneath no church mentioned once in Giraud's torn journal, a place where the earth has a mouth and the faithful come to whisper into it. The locals refused to speak of it. They only called it La Bouche Sombre, the dark mouth. After 4 days of walking, they found it. It was not a monastery. It was a wound. A gaping black cavern set into a jagged cliffside, surrounded by statues of weeping monks, all headless. Inside, the air was wet, not from water, but from breath. Something was alive here, deep in the dark, and in the center of the first chamber sat a stone throne. Upon it, a man with no eyes, no tongue, but a trepanned skull with 27 holes. Tubes of metal and bone spiraled from each hole into the stone behind him, like roots feeding into a larger creature. Eleanor dropped to her knees. "Giraud." He raised his head, not in recognition, but in response, as if summoned, and then, in unison, the walls began to breathe. The stone pulsed. Voices echoed, not from mouths, but from memory. They were surrounded by sound, thick and gelatinous, pressing into their skulls like fingers searching for entry. "Thought was never yours," said the voices. "You are only receivers. The body was a design flaw. The bone is the true temple." Thévenin fell to his knees, blood dripping from his ears. He saw then, not through his eyes, but through the hole that had always been there. He saw the line, stretching backward through time. Giraud had trepanned hundreds, thousands, but it was not the drilling that mattered. It was the arrangement. Every borehole, every skull had been placed precisely, like keys on an instrument, and now, through him, the final note would sound. Eleanor reached for him, crying, "You must resist, you must!" Her voice broke. Thévenin turned, and she was frozen, eyes wide, lips parted. Blood leaked from her nostrils. Her skull had caved inward. He screamed, but it was not his scream that filled the cave. It was a chorus, high, shrieking, joyous, the sound of something finally arriving. And then, from the hole in Giraud's skull, a light began to pour, not golden, not divine, something red, wet, crawling. And it spoke, directly into Thévenin's mind. "You opened the final hole. The age of flesh is done. Let the listening begin." Subscribe now to our channel for more dark, emotionally intense, and psychologically rich stories from the forgotten corners of history. We uncover the disturbing truths, the haunting mysteries, and the terrifying practices that shaped our world and the human minds behind them.